The next session is Archival Continuity Between the Past and the Future, and our speakers will be Chrystyna Kolos, Oleksandr Pankieiev, Viktoriya, Yakovlyeva.
Somebody's name is Chernyavska.
Yeah, I know. It's all very phonetic, I know. Kateryna and Maryna Chernyavska. Viktoriya, I apologize, but I don't want to trip over the letters.
Usually it happens with my last name.
Try to read.
The first speaker is Chrystyna Kolos from the Ukrainian Canadian Resource and Documentation Center. Chrystyna is a board member of the Ukrainian Canadian Resource and Documentation Center and a volunteer archivist at the center, involved with interviews, material maintenance and cataloging, University of Toronto BSc, pharmacy graduate, retired hospital pharmacist, board member, and program coordinator of N2Esh Canada, lifelong member of PLAS Canada and involved with youth programming and leadership training.
Добрий день. Thank you for this opportunity, am I being heard, to introduce you to UCRDC, an organization I myself knew so very little about just a few years ago. I'm probably the most junior of all people here. I have no experience with archives, even though I'm called an archivist. My involvement started shortly after I retired, after 33 years as a pharmacy career. As you can see, I'm no academic and no researcher, yet some friends were willing to overlook my lack of experience and qualifications, and certain that I needed to fill my newly found leisure hours with more meaningful endeavors. As a result, I was drafted as a volunteer to the UCRDC organization. I shall try to describe to you how over the years UCRDC evolved as an organization, how it grew its archival collection, and what projects it has undertaken along the way. Okay, so the year was 1982, now more than 35 years ago. Ukrainians in Canada and the free world were about to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Holodomor, the famine genocide perpetrated by the Soviet regime in 1932-33 that claimed several million Ukrainian lives. These tragic events, though fairly well remembered by the Ukrainian community, at that time were not widely known or acknowledged by the rest of the world. So a group of politically engaged, conscious Ukrainian Canadians, activists in the Toronto area, decided that something more than a commemoration was required and to call attention to this injustice. They decided to produce a documentary film about the Holodomor in Ukraine. To this end, they formed the Ukraine Famine Research Committee, which is the precursor to the UCRDC, and the members of the founding committee are listed there. The committee included academics and professionals, and here is an old photograph with the members meeting with Patriarch Luboslav Lubachevsky and Bishop Isidore Borechki. Vasily Nishevsky from the left, William Koroluk, Ostap Vinnichky, Yuri Darevich. As a youngster, you might know some of these people. Bogdan Onishchuk. So the committee engaged experienced filmmakers, Slavko Novichky and Yuri Luhovey, to produce the film Harvest of Despair, while urgently collecting funds and support around the community for the project. At that time, in 1982, there was no easy access to Soviet archives or sources, but 50 years after the Holodomor, it was believed that Western government archives would be opened in order to shed more light on the events. So the completed documentary utilized filmed interviews with survivors of the Holodomor, as well as commentary by Western journalists and scholars of Soviet history, such as Malcolm Muggeridge, Robert Conquest, and James Mace. As a result, the film, Harvest of Despair, premiered successfully in 1984 at the University of Toronto, garnered several international film awards, and was widely shown on Canadian and foreign networks. Originally, it was produced in English. Later, versions were released in Ukrainian, French, and Spanish. So, in the process of making the documentary film, the committee collected many hours of recorded documentation about the Holodomor, only a fraction of which was actually used in the film. Other documents and interviews on related Ukrainian topics were also being collected. Thus, in 1986, the committee restructured itself into a research institute and officially changed its name to the Ukrainian Canadian Research and Documentation Center. At this time, Iroida Vinnichka joined the board of UCRDC as chief archivist to deal with the ever-expanding holdings and collections. So to be useful, the material needed to be organized, cataloged, annotated, stored, obviously, and it needed a permanent home. So in 1990, UCRDC was given access to build its facility at the St. Vladimir Institute in Toronto, just across the street from the university campus where it can be found today. As for the workforce, Iroida was very fortunate. She brought together a group of dedicated volunteers who to this day meet once a week and deal with the task of organizing the archival material. So the collections, over the years, the scope of interest of UCRDC, while continuing to encompass work on the Holodomor, was broadened to include research on other historical events relating to Ukrainians in Canada, Ukraine, and other parts of the Ukrainian diaspora. Oral history gathering has played a major part in the endeavors of UCRDC, always has. However, other archival materials are also currently being collected, such as textual documents, unpublished memoirs, photographs, exhibits, reference library, films, and videos. The board of UCRDC, president and members are all volunteers and receive no financial reward for their work. Current board president is Nicholas Dershko, and the members, again as listed, are serving on the board. And basically those are the only members that are actively involved with the organization. The goals and activities have been described as follows, all dealing with the Ukraine and Ukrainian Canadian cause. Preparing, distributing documentary films, recording audio, video interviews with persons describing past historical events and current life in Ukrainian diaspora, preparing, distributing educational material in various languages, sponsoring lectures, conferences, exhibits, supporting academic research and publications, serving as a resource center for students, researchers, journalists, politicians, and others, raising funds for the upkeep of the activities of the center, and that is a big one. So let's now take a quick tour of the facility. Here we are on the second floor of St. Vlad's at the entrance to the center. And Božena is our executive administrator, and she's the only full-time paid staff at the center, and she does mostly office work and organizational work. There is okay. Are we stuck?
Take the space bar.
Okay. There is an open work area where the volunteers gather once a week and work on their individual projects and assignments. Here we are. The reference book library lines the outsides of the room and contains approximately 2,000 volumes. The archives room, it's halfway climate controlled, houses the UCRDC audio recordings, as well as donated collections such as the U.S. Congressional Commission on the Ukraine Famine of 1988, the James Mace collection, and Bohdan Huk collection of interviews taken with Ukrainian insurgent army members in Zakhersonya, 89-2000. The early recordings were all made on cassette tapes, which we still store, and later transcribed to CDs, and there's approximately 750 audio recordings. The videos are also stored in the room. There's approximately 450 to date. The early recordings were made on VHS tapes and later transcribed to DVDs. The latest videos are now being written onto USB thumb drives if necessary. So just to illustrate, the the oral history being taken in 1991. Note the large video camera using for the VHS, I suppose. This is Ores Subtelny with Miroslav Lubachevsky. And in contrast, 2017, we have an interviewer using an iPad, which we now have, for a direct digital recording, and it's Danilo Daravich with Vsevolod Isayu for the interview. So the documentation for each person interviewed is filed in regular paper files, which includes release forms and personal data and background information, etc., whatever it is we could collect. The archive room houses a collection of personal and organizational documents. We have 77 gray boxes. I'm not sure what the meter length is, but the largest collection here is 14 boxes of Divizia Halichina documents. There are some photographs in the collection, approximately 6 boxes, and we have a collection of unpublished memoirs that have been given to the center, approximately 100 individual documents here. So digitizing and cataloging of old audio and video recordings has been a major project over the last years. The center would like to preserve its oral history in the best possible format, and of course that best is always changing, but you want to make them available to future scholars. So it's an ongoing process. I would like to just quickly illustrate a story and how things come together at UCRDC. I call it the case history or the story of Leon Hloba. Leon Hloba, aged 88, is a retired photographer for the Hamilton Spectator newspaper, a city just west of Toronto. Leon dies, and his next of kin, his sister, niece, and grandniece, open his safety deposit box to discover documents referring to Leon and events during World War II. Quite the surprise to them. They didn't know about this. It happens that Leon is a decorated war hero. He defected with his Ukrainian unit from the German army to fight on the side of the French resistance. The family is not sure what they should do with these documents. They have documents, but they're verified, very interesting, very little known facts of World War II history. So they come to the center. The documents, photos, correspondence, army orders, mostly in French and German, are brought. This material needs a scholar now to look at it and write it up. So for this kind of work, well, of course, we require some funding. Can the family supply the funds? That's always a question. So Nadia, the grandniece of Leon Hloba, just happens to be a performance cellist. So she organizes a fundraising event at St. Vlad's Institute along with 5 of her cellist friends. And so it was very nice. The funds for developing the file here were raised. UCRDC approaches a young PhD history graduate of Ukrainian Canadian descent who just completed his studies in Montreal and is fluent in French, luckily for us, and he agrees to take on the project, so we are now waiting for his scholarly paper. Just a few things that are never straightforward, but it's well worth the effort in the end. So a major treasure, of course, of UCRDC, as mentioned, is the Oral History Archive. Audio, video recordings of interviews collected over more than 35 years with people who took part in some of the most significant events in contemporary Ukrainian history. I believe that UCRDC Oral History Archives is one of the largest collections of audio and visual testimonies on Ukrainian themes in North America. That's what I'm told. It consists of over 1,000 separate recordings, over 2,000 hours of interviews and documentation, and relevant material. Some of the topics examined include stories by Holodomor survivors, Ukrainians who served with the Canadian Armed Forces in World War II, Ukrainians who helped and rescued Jews during the Holocaust, Ukrainians imprisoned in the Soviet Gulag, Ukrainians who were German camp prisoners, Ukrainians who were forced laborers in Germany, Ukrainians who were resettled in Poland after World War II. So all people have stories to tell, and especially those that have lived the 20th century world experience. Some are more willing to talk and delve into their past, reshuffle their memories, and tell their tales. Others not. Sometimes these tales are painful, sometimes tragic, but usually remarkably enlightening, and we appreciate it. I've come to realize that some academic historians tend to be suspicious of oral history. They argue that people's memories are distorted by time and that oral history is therefore frequently unreliable. Yet others praise the great potential. It can be said that oral history has made the illiterate literate and has given the silent masses a voice. This is especially true in the absence of written documentation, which is often the case in times of war and upheaval. Furthermore, experience has shown that the average person is much more frank and forthcoming when speaking, even in the presence of a recording machine, than when writing. It's simply less of a burden. So to be sure, memories and any self-serving motives of the storyteller must be checked whenever possible against documentary sources. But many similar kinds of problems arise in using written records, such as newspaper accounts. Written sources can also carry personal bias, inaccuracies, narrow vision, and questionable interpretation. So oral history or storytelling has one great advantage. It is very interesting, even to students at a young age. So personal stories can complement and enhance the information in history books. They can act as a valuable bridge between the impersonal, important, but perhaps dull narratives about the past and the dynamic experiences of real people. So that is exactly what the various UCRDC projects attempt to do: utilize recorded oral history to spread the word, back up facts, and bring history to life. I have a few examples and highlights of these projects. The barbed wire solution. The arrest and internment of enemy aliens in Canada during World War I, many of whom were Ukrainian immigrants, was the topic of Yuri Luhovey's documentary film in '94, Freedom Had a Price, which was supported and distributed by UCRDC. The following year, after obtaining an Ontario government grant, UCRDC put together a traveling exhibit on this same topic, the barbed wire solution. The exhibit toured the main centres of Canada, stopping in particular in those places that had housed the internment facilities. So the exhibit now resides in Vernon, BC. Another film, the next film project for the UCRDC was the hour-long film between Hitler and Stalin, Ukraine and World War II, completed in 2003. Produced by Slavko Novichky, it was narrated by the famed Hollywood actor of Ukrainian descent, Jack Palance, originally produced in English, then released in Ukrainian in 2005. There's also an English version with Russian subtitles released in 2016. We thought that might be interesting to some Russian speakers. Though not directly under the auspices of UCRDC, the Center is no less proud to point to the success of two other programs, spin-offs of the Holodomor Interviews and Documentary Project, who share office space, resources, and support of UCRDC. These are the Holodomor Research and Education Consortium and the Holodomor Mobile Classroom and National Awareness Tour, the Holodomor Bus for short. So both of these projects utilize experiential education, spreading awareness about the man-made famine of 1932-33 in Ukraine, while underscoring the consequences of hate, oppression, and making it very applicable to everyday situations and discrimination. So oral history, along with archival material, at work very well here. In 2015, UCRDC embarked on another oral history project, this time focusing on the children of the Holodomor survivors, generously funded by the Temerte Family Foundation. Here we have an interview being conducted with the daughter of Olha Mak. As we all know, the history of the Ukrainian Holodomor has been studied and written about. What was missing was, again, the study of the second generation, the survivors' children. To our knowledge, this is the first such project about the second generation of survivors embarked on. And history, according to successive generations, is again highly valuable information to gather for research. The purpose is not to record any trauma, but rather discover what the survivors' children see as the Holodomor legacy for Ukrainians. Has the knowledge of the parents having gone through Holodomor experience had any influence on the descendants, physically, emotionally, spiritually, or otherwise? So because UCRDC is conveniently located next to the university. UCRDC often hosts visitors, researchers, students, academics, journalists, politicians. Sometimes that is a chance to corner them and record an interview, and that chance is often taken.
1 minute.
1 minute. Oh, come on, give me 2 more. For example, a group of U of T students came in. They were working on, had a class of gender and society in modern Ukraine. They were interested in the archive, but mostly they were interested in a tour given by, of course, our archivist, Yakovlyeva, about the book that she had coordinated, Extraordinary Lives of Ordinary Women. The study and analysis of such primary source interviews was, and likely and life stories had an important dimension to East European, Ukrainian, and Soviet histories, and this was from the interviews taken at the center. Another project, which I'm sure everybody will be interested in, is the Canadian Armed Forces and Ukrainian component. So over 35,000 Canadians of Ukrainian descent served in the military. They were not only part of the integral part of the military, but also contributed significantly after the war for post-war policy on displaced persons and refugees. So we have interviews with servicemen collected during 1989 to 91 that have recently been digitized, and these interviews have become a starting point for the new project, namely a documentary film on the subject by filmmaker Ivan Paskevich of Winnipeg. And the Ukrainian Canadian Veterans Fund has generously supported this endeavor. Oral history of Ukrainian Canada, a new project started in the 125th anniversary year of Ukrainian settlement, and it embarks to collect oral history from our most senior citizens, I guess, of Ukrainian descent, both people that have been born in this country or came in as children or adults. To date, about 60 interviews have been recorded as the project continues. Video clips and information can be viewed on the project website, but as you can imagine, this is a broad subject. There's Ukrainian Canadians across from coast to coast. And since UCRDC is only in Toronto, they could use some cooperation, some help. So if anybody wants to volunteer, here's another project for you. We do have a website, ucrdc.org. Like others, it's always in constant need of work, always a work in progress. There's latest news from the center is on the website. It highlights the studies that are undertaken. It gives information on various collections. And it makes available excerpts of the interviews and documentary films. So it is a valuable resource. But our most valuable resource, I must say, is the contribution made to the center by Yakovlyeva, our longtime volunteer, and I'll underline volunteer archivist. Since the early 80s, she's been cooperating with researchers in Canada, US, Australia, and eventually independent Ukraine. She has personally done a lot of the interviews and a lot of the annotations of the oral history. She's now 85 years old. She does not hide that fact, and she's looking for successors to her work. She answers emails, cooperates, coordinates volunteers, remains on the board, organizes a lot of the work of the center, leads tours, and we're very lucky to have her. She's mostly extraordinary, but we're the humble beneficiaries of all her work, and she's always involved. She'll see her in most photographs from the center. So just quickly, in conclusion, I'd just like to make one more plug for oral history. I recently had a chance to listen to the CBC 2017 Massey Lecture Series by Payan Akavan, an international lawyer and professor of McGill University. In his lecture series entitled In Search of a Better World, he argues that deceptive utopias, political cynicism, and public apathy have given rise to major human rights abuses, religious persecution, horror of ethnic cleansing, and genocide. So Payan Akavan believes that one road to this better world is to work on increasing public awareness, raising the level of each person's empathy, and for the plight of others. So we thought, well, this is exactly what telling, recording, and sharing personal stories is all about. So this knowledge, empathy, that is generally what we want to encourage while we're doing our oral history collection. So preserving the past and making sure it survives for the future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chrystyna, for a very thorough and very interesting presentation. We will take a few questions now. Any questions?
Amazing presentation, very interesting. I'm really impressed with all the work you're doing, wonderful work. I'm wondering, you don't have paid staff at all, and we heard during the last 2 days that personnel is one of the biggest issues because there is either one paid staff or 1.5, or mostly it's volunteers. How do you do that? How can you succeed so much and achieve so much with only volunteer work?
Well, the volunteers come in once a week, and it's really a social occupation for them. Usually they come in and they do some annotation, some filing, some cataloging. A lot of the work, the project work, is done on basis of grants and funding. So we will apply to any institution that's willing to give us money, and on the basis of the money received, then some project could be undertaken. So whether it's summer students working for a little length of time, or like the Tenate Foundation gives us major funds, we can hire a researcher, and we can hire like Sofia Isayu. She's done a number of oral history projects with us, and that's when a project really gets underway. And then when there's like a fund, like the Veterans Fund is willing to give us a major donation, then you obviously you outsource it and you get a film director to do a film. So it's based on external funding, but not really much government funding.
Thank you. Other questions?
It's open Tuesdays and Thursdays?
Sorry?
Is it open?
Oh.
It's open Tuesdays and Thursdays, as I understand?
No, the center is open 5 days a week during the week. Volunteers come in 1 day, but the Brzena, the office administrator, is there and can always arrange
for
for
it's possible to work any day of the week?
Yes, it is.
Including Saturdays?
Maybe by special arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, on to the next one. Thank you very much. Our next topic, the challenges of building an institutional archive, CIUS Digital Archives Project. Viktoriya Yakovlyeva, Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. Vika is the Archival and Research Associate at the CIUS. She holds a PhD in Social Theory and Cultural Studies and has been involved in several major research and archival projects, which include the memorial for the Lviv ghetto victims, for the Lviv Interactive Project at the Center for Urban History of East Central Europe, Lviv, Ukraine, as well as the Jewish sites of memory in Lviv, a survey conducted by the Neue Synagogue. I have to sit down for this. Stiftung Zentrum, and Robert Bosch Foundation in Berlin, and the Center of Urban History of East Central Europe in Lviv. She also worked on the cataloging and systemization of the audiovisual collection at the Bogdan Medvitsky Archives. Sorry.
It's not Victoria.
Okay. And Oleksandr Pankieiev coordinates digital communications and media for a number of teams at the Arts Collaboration Enterprise Faculty of Arts at the University of Alberta. He is also an associate researcher, Department of Act Archaeology, MS Khrushchevsky Institute of Ukrainian Archaeography and Source Studies, National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, and coordinator and co-coordinator of various print and multimedia projects, including the Research Initiative on Democratic Reforms in Ukraine website and the Ukrainian Institute of Ukrainian Studies Digital Archives. These two are very accomplished people, and I will stop reading their biography and let them speak, because that is more Thank you. And I'm making a mess of it anyway.
Okay, thank you for the great introduction. Okay, so it is a great opportunity for us to talk about our project today, because honestly we have not had a chance to introduce our project in public, because actually this project is 2 years right now. So, and I will talk probably at the beginning about the origins, how actually everything started. So in May 1985, Stepania Bohachevska-Postoshenko of Toronto donated $100,000 to the Canadian Foundation of Ukrainian Studies to establish an endowment fund for archival fellowships to be awarded by the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. The Bohachevska-Postoshenko Archival Fund endowment was dedicated to the memory of Stefania's mother, who valued learning and encouraged knowledge of her heritage. Later, in 1987, as a result of 2-to-1 matching grant from the government of Alberta, so it's really the great time for Ukrainian studies, the archival fund was announced to stand at $300,000. Interest from the fund has been used to locate archives, transfer them to appropriate institutions, catalog existing collections, and publish finding aids. Contribution of Stefania Bohachevska-Postoshenko was celebrated at the banquet organized by CAUS. And addressing the banquet guests, Bohachevska-Postoshenko stressed that archives were the memory of people, and it was her intention to assist scholars to study the Ukrainian heritage by encouraging the collection and preservation of the archival holdings on which scholarly work depends. With this intent, the Bohachevska-Postoshenko Fund was grown and produced a sustainable archival collections on its own, some of which in particular a number of CAUS research reports and CAUS Digital Archive, which I'm presenting right now. So, about how we actually started this project. CAUS Digital Archives has been developed in close collaboration with the University of Alberta Libraries and the Arts Resource Center, and has been supported by generous donations from local organizations like, for example, Alberta Association for the Advancement of Ukrainian Studies. The CAUS Digital Archives project aims to digitize, systematize, and describe the core materials of the Institute that have been produced over the last 40 years, essentially since its foundation in 1976. As we already learned, that digitization is not the solution. And presentation by Krista tomorrow was really informative about this. So building a digital archives is a very complex process and requires many skills and knowledge, which unfortunately one person does not possess. So in our case, that is why we teamed up with all these above-mentioned groups on the campus of Alberta to brainstorm and discuss all available options. First problem to solve was what software or platform to use for archive. So Arts Resource Center was instrumental in this case. They suggested to use Omeka. It is what we use right now for this website. Omeka is a free web publishing platform for libraries, museums, archives, and scholars to design and curate collections and exhibitions, named after the Swahili word meaning to display or to be in public, and developed by the Roy Rosenzweig's Center for History and New Media at the George Mason University. Since Omeka publicly launched in 2018, its primary mission has been to address the growing need to preserve, curate, and present collected historical artifacts. The result is tool that is like free and also really like if you do not have any knowledge, you can use this really freely. So, and because Ameka uses Dublin core standards of metadata, it first applied to librarians, archivists, and public historians. Today, however, educators, students, and amateur academic and historians have built many sites provided by Ameka to showcase their research. So, for now, I would like to tour you a little bit what we have on our website. So, at this moment, we have digitized all our research reports, 66 research reports. And they are all materials searchable, so you can find using our search tool. You can download all materials. Also, we have our newsletters. And the funny story also, for example, this is a newsletter of winter 1987, and it is about the establishment of this fund, Pankieiev fund. So also we have digitized all our books on Ukrainians in Canada and all books which are already out of print. At this point we have over 50 books on this website. We have all our press releases. Also, we are working on the creation of photo gallery at this point, and our audio-visual materials. So talking about our audio and visual materials, just recently we discovered a huge collection at the University of Alberta, materials of our recordings, of lectures, seminars, and especially travel lectures, which were organized in 80s. And at this point, just recently, 1 week ago, over 100 cassettes were digitized, and we are in the process of describing and uploading them online. So it will take probably a couple months, and they will be available on our website. So, and what we're actually doing right now, because the process of digitization right now is not completed, and we are working also on our current materials. So for example, all our activities which we are doing right now also represented on this website. For example, if you go video and visual materials, so you will be able to find all our lectures, recent lectures.
Is Maryna Momrik's book launch there?
Unfortunately, no.
I missed it.
Yes. And for example, 2 years ago, we organized a conference devoted to the 40th anniversary of our institute, and so all materials, all videos, and transcribed and uploaded to this website. So, and they are really searchable and really really easy to use. So if you click presentations, you will be able to listen and also
this is the one
to follow everything, because everything transcribed, and we have also footnotes. So now I'm turning floor to Viktoriya.
So in the time remaining, I would just like to offer basically a few words of encouragement on how. So I've been doing this for only 2 years, so this conference has been a very humbling experience for me, talking to people who have been doing it for a very long time. But from just the experience of 2 years that I have earned, I would like to share some things. And those, first of all, this is the archive, right? This is just the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, right? We have right now almost 1,700 items available, searchable online, but this is just the beginning. You can see that this is just several collections. This is something about 80 collections, right? And when we go into the storage rooms of the institute, you can see that this is just a very small percentage. I can't even tell you how small. So what I would like to say is that Omeka, the platform, is free. It's a software that anybody can use. Any little organization can take it as a tool for creating its own archive. And I know it's a complex task. Digitization is complex. We've heard yesterday how much labor it requires and how it becomes outdated very fast. And yet, it's possible. And it's not, it's doable, right? In fact, from my own experience working with a new platform like this, I can tell you that if you're optimistic and if you have an email account or a Facebook page, or even if you've ever had to fill out an Excel spreadsheet, you can figure out the Omeka yourself. You can fill it up and make yourself an institutional archive, really. Because what Omeka does, what it's good for, it prompts you. It gives you little suggestions on what you're supposed to do. Like, for example, we've heard that one of the scariest words used by digital archivists is metadata. Metadata is very important, which is data about the data that we have, right? I like looking at it as a story, as the narrative of the material that we have. That without description, a box of stuff without description is garbage. With description is an archive, right? So this is what it is, metadata. And a platform like this, even though it's not perfect, you will see if you ever work with it that it's not perfect. It does have its own tricks that you can figure out eventually, but what it's good for, it really gives, it's very user-friendly, right? So for example, the metadata, it sounds very scary, and yet this thing, what it does, it's when you go on the inside and you try to add an item, it gives you a list of questions that you basically need to answer in order to publish your item. So it tells you what is it that you need to tell the machine in order for this information to be searchable, right? It asks you for the name, for the author, for contributors, for the span of the years that it covers, all those fantastic things. And once you put them in, what it does, it generates the programming language of metadata, which you then can download, store separately, and back up, insert into a different database, and that will be your alternative source of access. But what is crucial is that for metadata, no matter how fantastic it is, you see, it's easy. The computer this software will give you the programming language, but without the person putting it in, you won't get it. No matter how sophisticated the digitization, whatever software you found, you need a person, a physical person, to go and punch in the data, right? And the more you know, the better, the wider your narrative is, the more searchable it is. I want to show you one example of the metadata that does not look scary. So if I just go into search here and type one name, Roma Franco, look what we get. So, for example, it doesn't tell you very much. It doesn't even tell you the list, right? It doesn't even necessarily tell you, you cannot even see the matching name Roma Franco. For example, this one is called response, right? And response doesn't tell you much, right? Response. But once you click on it, it tells you that what it is. This is actually a response. So this is a reference to a fantastic discussion that happens in this time between Roma Franco and Maryna. Fantastic. but it's only a person who can do it. It's go back and say, behind the scenes, right, where you fill in all the data, you can add this little description that it's in fact a response. It's just not the title response. It's not all of it, right? But this is the response in this ongoing discussion. And once you linked the two things between each other, researcher can come in and find, and imagine, instead of just a response, you get this discussion, a span of several years. And this is what it is, metadata. It's only a physical person who can go and fill out the context, which is what it is the most important thing for researchers as well. And especially in Ukraine, I would like just to offer a word of encouragement how important it has been from my experience for Ukraine, for people in Ukraine. Stuff like this, digitization, yes, goes out of fashion super fast. How to update it. But this is a platform also for servicing the research community in Ukraine. Because microfilms are not available in Ukraine. You have to come here physically and look at them. This is searchable from Ukraine. You can go and look at it, and I don't know if you might be aware of how much interaction, how reciprocal is that relationship of the establishment of Ukrainian science between what was produced in Ukraine and outside Ukraine. So stuff like this, platforms like this, provide this very unique and absolutely necessary tool for exchange, primarily, right? Even though they're not perfect, absolutely. And then another thing I wanted to mention is that, so speaking about, it's lots, 5 minutes is lots. So, one of the challenges that, and I must say again, maybe I'm an optimist, but it's not so much challenges that obstacles to be to overcome, right? So of course, establishing a policy for what, and it's best to start with it right away. As soon as you got the box of stuff, right, start a policy. What is it we're gonna keep, and what is it we're gonna discard, right? So yesterday, John Paul had this question about the correspondence and how do you back up and how do you create a record of digital correspondence and stuff. So I went to the storage room and I found this fantastic letter. It's 1993 correspondence, right? So it's printed off from it's an email, and then it's backed up and filed as a correspondence. So it's a wonderful example of hypertext and how it becomes, first it's digital, then it gets paper. And it says, it's 1993, and it says, "Dear such and such, I don't really have anything to say. I was just really excited to use email for the first time and the internet." And then it's been printed, and then it's filed as official correspondence from 1993 in a box, right? So what do you do with stuff like that? It's priceless to me, right? It tells you so much about the institutional culture, about all of these relationships, about all of this fantastic stuff, and yet, for the purposes of something like this, we probably won't be digitizing those letters, right? So establishing a policy is one of the main challenges. And by policy, I also mean the copyright policy and the access policy, right? So what we picked for this particular platform is the Creative Commons. You might have heard about it. And Creative Commons is the international body that developed a set of rules for the sharing the material. And the one that we picked is the license number 4, which gives us opportunity to share it with researchers worldwide. So anybody in the classroom in Ukraine can download an article from here and share it with their students. And that will not be an infringement of copyright, just because we have already sort of done the job and we looked into it, and this is what we would like it to be. So this is another thing. How? One little thing here is that creating an institutional archive is actually quite easy compared to some other cases. Private archive is probably much more difficult, because what is good for the institution, one of the benefits and privileges that it grants us is security. It's the networking, right? It's the fact that we have an office, a copyright office at the University of Alberta, which is available to help people who would like to, and also community people who would like to establish such a thing. So, for example, the way we wrote this thing of course, happened with lots of consultation with the copyright office of the university. But why it's so fantastic is that it's available to anybody. So you can go to, if you are looking, so who was speaking? Somebody was just speaking about the legal, right? Like how do you, the policy, right? So for example, what we had to do, and that was, again, it's what the institutions are good for. The Copyright Office, you just Google it, it shows up, and one of the fantastic things that they offer here for free, available to anybody, is resources, right? So for example, you click on resources, and one of the things that we found incredibly useful were all of these forms and templates that you can adopt for your own needs, and then get every single person who donates the materials to sign, for example, right? Or somebody else say, this here is Creative Commons, this is the one that we picked, right? So a simple permission letter of how this material will be used in the future will grant you so much freedom down the road, right? So this is my suggestion, this is what I took away from my limited experience with of working with an archive, is if you find yourself in a situation where you're a little bit stuck with the archive creation, find yourself an institution to talk to, partner up with, you know what I mean? And then so many resources are available just online, just for free. You take them, you adopt them, and you use them. Same with the Mecca, right? It's a free platform. It won't do everything for you. You still need stuff, you still need summer students, but it will help you even generate the metadata, which is, otherwise you'll need a computer person to program it for you, right? But this software will do it for you as well. So, 1 minute, I just would like to say at the very end that when I was doing my education in Lviv, one of the things that we were recommended, it was a mandatory required text, one of the texts produced outside of Ukraine was Encyclopedia of Ukraine, and some other things that I just want to point out that this is so important, the digitization part of it, because of the access it grants to people overseas and all over the world, right? When you're in Ukraine, any little piece of book in English gets a waitlist to read. There's a waitlist in the library to read something that's come from abroad that has a different point of view. So this stuff makes it available. So that's about it.
Thank you very much. This was very fascinating.
Questions? I'm running away already.
Okay, questions.
Yes, I just want to begin by making a quick reference to a couple of points that were made yesterday. We heard from Little Monrek yesterday about the Fighting Eights that was sponsored by CIUS. And we heard today about a couple of examples of Fighting Eights that Okama has, which CIUS helped with. And I just wanted to say that to make the point that, of course, whenever the opportunity comes, I always like to make reference to this wonderful resource. And I like the fact that you mentioned about how useful it is for people in Ukraine. And so my question is, to what extent do we know to what extent this archive is being used?
It's probably a question to me. Okay. Yeah, because for us it is really important to know how our archive is used, by whom, and from what locations. So we use Google Analytics for this purpose, and it was installed at the beginning, before we even launched our website. So And it's talking about also metadata, because metadata, it means that we have to think not only about person who is going to use this actually our materials, but also about machines, because metadata, it's not only about how a person will be looking these materials, but also about Google search and about all this stuff. So we always trying to come up with new words to describe our materials, just not only covering how people, but also how machines think. So at this point, when we started, we had like approximately every month just only 50 visitors. At this point, we have like almost 1,000 visitors every month. So it's just, we are growing, and we just right now like more concentrated on like uploading materials. But the future, our goal is also dissemination of this knowledge. So, and it was our initial idea also.
What is your email address, please?
So it's in the context here, and contact us, and it's CIUS ARC.
Pardon?
It's just CIUS ARC.
I cannot read that, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, it's CIUS lowercase. CIUS.
CIUS, thank you.
ARCH @ualberta.ca. And just one quick little second is that if you don't even know what you're looking for and you would like just to browse, look what it does for you. You can go browse by tag and click on anything. Here gives you a whole list of what is it available, even if you don't know what you're looking for, right? You can click on Ukrainian Summer Language School, you know what I mean? And all of this fantastic little things. That's the benefit of the digitization, despite all of the things that it is.
Question here?
I imagine you're in a fairly enviable situation that CIUS has always been interested in its own history.
Yes.
You have complete collections of newsletters,
Exactly.
complete collections of bulletins, all that stuff.
Yes.
All that stuff, and yet there is still, boxes and boxes and boxes in the archive, university archive,
Yeah,
primarily.
because we have like phases of our project, and also at this point we are not doing stuff which institute has produced actually, but we have many historical records in our rooms, and our probably second or third phase will be to digitize and transcribe them. For example, we just recently go in contact with archive in Great Britain, and because we have a great collection of foreign affairs of Great Britain materials. So, and we are planning to digitize, and they actually gave us rights to do. So in the future, it's going to be the part of our collection.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, could you confirm the acronym for the platform and software you were talking about? Was it OMEGGA, Omega?
OMEKA.
OMEKA?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Question?
Just a quick comment on Omeka. Omeka exists in two versions. You can use it either online for free, just subscribe as to any cloud service. It has limited number of options in that case, but it's free. You don't have to worry about your server space, anything like that. But in that case, you don't really know where your data resides. And in case of archives, very often, in your case, and great presentation, thank you so much. I was waiting for it. I knew you were working in this project, but I haven't seen the summary. In your case, you're talking about documents and materials produced by CIUS, so probably you, I hope, well, you own the copyright for those materials. But for many archival materials, the situation is not straightforward at all, and there are very many privacy issues involved, and you don't want to put that material online, even if you have permission to. So in that case, it's more tricky. So this is one. The second option, it's also free, but you need technical knowledge or a technical person to work with. You host it on your own server, not online. You control where it resides, who has access to it, but for it you do need to have a computer person who knows how to install it. It can be customizable almost unlimited way because, and you're using that option. But if you are, I know many community archives use Omeka, but they often use the first option because although it's more limited, but it's easier to use if you don't have anyone on staff. So just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So I guess if you're relying on an open source software or service like this, what about the long term? If something happens to Omeka,
Good question.
then you lose your archives, right?
Well,
In our case,
you back it up.
Yeah.
You back it up, like Krista was saying, at least 3 copies. And one of the things,
It is really actually in our case we are really safe because we are we are really safe because we are the part of university, and every website which exists at the university backs up every month. But for you, what I suggest, because there are many options online, and you can go and register. Also, it is not free, and every month, your site will be backed up. And then, if something happens to your website, you have like a mirror of your website, so from which you can actually restore all your materials. So it's my suggestion, but sometimes it's not cheap because it depends on the volume of your materials.
So we actually went through a process with the UCC Saskatchewan, and last year we went through, actually 2 years ago, a process of developing a documents management policy, including an archiving policy. So we've got the policies in place. It's now about the process and ensuring that the backups are taking place. But again, if it's an open source software and something happens to it and then it's no longer current, your archives are they going to be accessible?
They are going to be accessible because in our case, as I already described, that the mirror, it contains first of all files. So maybe we will be suffering to restore the structure. So in this case, the structure, but the files will be safe. Yes.
May I add a comment? I sometimes teach a course on how to choose archival data software for your institution. And what I always say, when we choose, even if it's free software or open source software, always look at who created it, whether there is institutional support, whether there is a community around it, because there are many beautiful cases of software in the last decade or so that has huge community of support that contributes their own pieces of code that helps the software grow, become more functional, more sophisticated. So you have to look at all those things, whether there's support, whether from institutions who have money, like university, or plus the community support that would mean there's customer service, that you're not emailing someone with your question and then waiting for 3 days or 3 months or never getting an answer. So this is one thing. And another thing, just to comment about open source software, someone said once, and I like to give it as an example, free software is free as in a puppet. So you get it for free, but then you have to feed it, you have to clean after it, you have to take it to the vet, so it involves a lot of work around it. If you have human resources who can do that, that's excellent. If not, you're just looking for those online solutions that also exist out there, but then there's these security issues and different things like that.
Yeah, because in our case, because we had to customize this website, and a lot of tools were developed personally just only for us. Because, for example, the structure of this website, the template of this website, so it was developed by Arts Resource Center for us. But for example, if you are planning to have really small one archive, so maybe it is suitable for you to use this particular free version. And also talking about Omeka, they actually have a community around around. And this community constantly is developing new tools and, like, for example, plugins which help this website work properly. So not only Omeka people are working on this, but also the community.
Thank you very much. What a fascinating presentation. Thank you. With Kateryna Kolos and Maryna Chernyavska, research activities documenting culture and traditions. Maryna is the archivist for the folklore, Cool Folklore Center at the Bogdan Medvitsky Archives. And she is also administers Alberta on Record, a provincial online database of the Archive Society of Alberta. She holds a Master's of Arts degree in Ukrainian folklore and a Master of Library and Information Studies. She is on several boards. She's very active and a huge champion of archives and archivists. And Kateryna Kolos is an archival assistant at the Bogdan Medvitsky Ukrainian Folklore Archives. And she holds a Master's of Arts degree in Ukrainian folklore for from the University of Alberta. And her research interests include folklore archives, material culture, ethnic cultural heritage, and identity.
I know lunch is coming, so we won't talk too long, although there's not enough time probably left for us, but we'll try to do our best. So our presentation today, it consists of 4 parts. I gotta make it big. You click right here. Yeah. First, we'll tell you a bit about our archives, how it started, about its history. Then we'll tell you about the period of growth and development and professionalization. Then we will show you some examples of very diverse collections that we house in our archives, and it will be just a snapshot. And then we'll also talk about some online access tools and different problems and solutions that we are experiencing while working with archives.
So Ukrainian, Bogdan Medvitsky Ukrainian Folklore Archives is a research archives that the main goal of which is to document, preserve, and make available Ukrainian Canadian cultural heritage. In particular, its intangible cultural heritage, and its phenomena or processes of folk culture. It is centered at the Cool Folklore Center, a research unit at the University of Alberta. And today we're talking about archives, but at the center we have also extensive research library and some material culture objects. But today we're talking about archives. So let's talk about the beginnings. Ukrainian Folklore Archives was established in 1977 by Bogdan Medvitsky, who was the professor at the Slavic department at the University of Alberta. That year, the first Ukrainian course was offered, with many to follow, which marked the beginning of Ukrainian folklore program at the University of Alberta. One of the required components of the folklore course was to do the field work. A short ethnographic research and to write a paper, analytical essay that resulted with interviews, recordings, and field notes, and also the textual records that became the first donations to the Folklore Center, which later was renamed in 2003 by Medvitsky, Professor Medvitsky, into Bogdan Medvitsky Ukrainian Folklore Archives. But before that, Professor saw the need, Bogdan Medvitsky saw the need, the financial need that will grow for the archives. So in 1989, the Ukrainian Folklore Archives Endowment was established. So talking about the student ethnographic collection that we have at the archives, that dates from 1977, and we have around 1,000 ethnographic projects that focus on Ukrainian proverbs, beliefs, material culture, music, calendar, and life cycle. And the students went to interview their grandparents and parents and neighbors and collected those first donations to the archives. With time, folklore course grew into Ukrainian graduate program that offered master's and doctoral degrees in Ukrainian folklore. So now graduate students and faculty members donate to Bogdan Medvedevsky Ukrainian Folklore Archives the extensive body of ethnographic research, interviews, materials, field notes, everything that goes along with writing a thesis or performing projects. For example, there are some examples of our graduate students' theses, just to see what topics, what themes we're interested in. For example, Andriy Nahachevsky, founding director of Cool Folklore Center and the first curator of Bogdan Medvedevsky Ukrainian Folklore Archives, enriched the archives with his ethnographic collections from Brazil, Slovakia, Ukraine, former Yugoslavia, Romania, of course, Ukrainian-Canadian community. Archival materials he deposited reflected his research in Ukrainian folk dance, Ukrainian-Canadian identity, ethnic representations, and dance theory. Natalie Kononenko, who joined the Ukrainian folklore program in 2004, contributed her ethnographic collections on folk tales, calendar, and life cycle rituals.
Okay. Folklore is very interdisciplinary. So while folklorists study what they study, they collect a whole lot of materials. And it can be culture, it can be history, music, and many, many, many different things. So materials that we started getting into our archives reflect many different aspects of life. In the Ukrainian folklore archives for all these years, starting from 1977, we usually had a graduate student who would be working part-time as an archival assistant looking after archives. Andriy Nahachevsky was serving as a curator of the archives for the longest time until 2016 or 16. But the problem that many of you mentioned, the lack of continuity in the staffing, was also there, because students come and go. Those who come for master programs stay for 2 years, for PhD a bit longer, but still, as the custodians of those collections changed so often, there was no continuation of practices. Also, they were all folklore students, they were not archival students, but what folklorists do very well, when they research whatever they do it in a very granular level. So whenever they create descriptions, they do it on an item level. Those who are archivists here, they know that archivists rarely get to the item level descriptions. Usually it's a very top level description of a phone or a collection, and if there is time and resources, you go to a series level or a file level, which doesn't happen very often. Because it takes so much time and effort, obviously. But because for folklorists it's very valuable, and this is how they analyze the materials that they collect, they try to do it on a very granular level, which resulted in parts of our materials described wonderfully, with great detail, while others not described at all. In 2010, we had 2 visiting lecturers who were invited to do a presentation for folklore students and the general public. They were Myron Momrek and Robert Klemash, whom I'm sure many of you know. After their presentation, they also looked at the Ukrainian folklore archives, and each of them later sent a letter providing their feedback and their opinion on the current, at that time, current situation of the archives, and also possible ways of moving into the future. And one of the notes that Miron mentioned was, what he mentioned also yesterday, was nobody can collect everything, so it makes a lot of sense to clearly identify your mandate and focus on something that is doable. I found out about these letters, unfortunately, many years after 2010. I wish I saw them back then, but they were very helpful and they provided a lot of insight for me. So the stage that I call professionalization is when we realize that we can't invent a wheel every time. We need a professional. This is why many answers to your questions were, go talk to an archivist. And we knew that there are those answers, we just need to know them, we need to find them out. So what we started from was, from the very top level, creating policy and defining a mandate. I'm not showing any of those things that I prepared, but 1 second, it's here. Firefox, the first slide, and then the second one. So we created a policy, very top-level document that talks about who we are, why we are, what we do, how we do things that we do. It didn't get into the procedures. This is the website, and now the PowerPoint that we have there, down there. It's a very top-level document. It doesn't tell you a procedure how to digitize a cassette because it's a separate story, but it aimed to provide this overarching policy that if the current person leaves and the next one comes, they would know what's happening and what to do next and won't start from scratch as happened many times in the past. We also realized that following accepted standards in the field is a very good idea because you can invent your own standards and they would serve your own purpose best. But using accepted standard like Dublin Core, like the previous presenters showed us, it has a lot of benefits in terms of discoverability of your data afterwards, because many people will be familiar with the standard and they will know what to look for when they try to find something in your materials. We also try to continuously develop professionally. There are courses, aside from Archives Institute that was mentioned an hour ago, there are 2 workshops a year that are organized by the Archives Society of Alberta, and they cover different topics from digital archiving to copyright and privacy, so very many different issues. And it's a continuous process because copyright law is changing in Canada, even at this very moment, so we don't know what's going to be there a year from now, so it's always good to keep abreast of what's going in this field. And also becoming part of the broader archival community was very beneficial for us. The Ukrainian Folklore Archives became an institutional member of the Archives Society of Alberta, and this is how we can benefit from their grants. Galt Museum and Archives is also an institutional member, so we can hire a person for the summer, and we can be hiring the same person every summer, which sometimes is very beneficial rather than having a new student every year. We have a chance to ask a question. If I start working with a material with glass plate negatives that I've never worked with, for example, I can ask a broader community a simple question. So what's the best to do with them? And I will get an answer. So having this network, this connection is I find it very, very helpful. We also work with our libraries at the university, and of course we are very lucky to be able to use those resources, especially with the Digital Initiatives Group, who help us with metadata and many, many other things. Also, the resources that we have now access to as institutional members are very practical things, like, for example, a vacuum cleaner for molded materials that you have. So things that we can't afford it. And I'm sure many of your institution cannot afford, but as members we have access. We can borrow it, we can keep it for a few months and then return. So it's a great privilege of being part of the community, and it helps us a lot. And now Katya will show you a few examples of our collections, just to show you the variety.
To show the variety, we have also a big collection of oral histories. It was such project, Saving Ukrainian Canadians' Heritage, done in 1971 and 1972. And it was done by SUMC and started by SUMC, and then was continued. The collaboration was continued with Folklore Center. and the Museum of Canada Saskatoon, and we have 700 photographs and sound recordings, and recently, last year, we also acquired 12 reel-to-reels and other documentations. Another example that we have is Selo Campus, also a very interesting collection that I was fortunate to work on as well. It was a camp in early 70s that inspired big activity in Ukrainian community. Many artists and leaders went there, and it was quite interesting to research and document that camp. And we also have big textual records and photographs and some documentations, even course materials. Next.
Do we have people, who went to the camp? Can I see? Because I'm sure Yars, I think, went, and Larissa went, Lesa went, and usually we sometimes even get people who come to the archives for totally different reason, and then we find out, I also went to the camp, and it's quite fascinating community that grew out of it.
Can I go in there and remove some things?
We'll talk about that later.
Also, we have family collections. Roman Onufrichuk collection. Has correspondence, souvenirs, embroideries. Correspondence also includes life matters from Ukraine, from Canada, also experience in DP camps in Europe. Also we have among other correspondence collections. This one is very interesting too, Breshko family collection. That this was a Lemko family who got into this process, and they were displaced. Some parts of the family went to Poland, some family members went to Ukraine, some to Canada, and they have a correspondence. So we have 6 centimeters of textual records of the letters. And was recently, we also had, continuing yesterday, a topic about southern Ukrainian population, immigrants. There was a little collection of the diaries of the Ukrainian choir, Boyan, that was in Lethbridge in southern Alberta, who went to work on the sugar beets, and they made a choir in such a little period of time. We're very active. So we have diaries and journal, and we have also pictures and a book.
So these are very, very few examples. We have thousands of collection, and it's a lot of work, and I can't see the end of it. There is a lot. All archival institutions have a big backlog, and I used to be naive and think that all such institutions as provincial archives, they got it all. They know it all and have done it all, but in fact every institution is just a different scale. So our collections are really big, and at the current moment I can't even say how many meters of materials we have, unfortunately. A huge portion of our materials is audiovisual, simply because it started from field work, and it's very rich, very huge and rich. So when we started, when I came to work, it was not from the very beginning. First, we just used a spreadsheet as our database because, well, you got to have something, right? And then we collaborated with the Museum and Collection Services on campus. This is the umbrella organization that unites 29 different collections in humanities and social sciences and hard sciences as well. And they offered us to use the database product that they decided was the best for their collections, and it's called MIMSI. I don't know who knows Andrei knows MIMSI, I'm sure. Andrei Chernyavska worked with it too. So it's a museum database, and if you have archives, museum databases don't work for archivists, and library databases don't work for archivists, because archives are organized, they are hierarchies, they're organized in hierarchies, and museums are different in the way that they have collections, and it's very flat division. So there is a collection, there are items within a collection. While in archive you have a big form or collection, you have series within it, you have files within series, and you may have even further subdivisions to SUFO and different other things. So, but having something is better than having nothing, so we used MIMSI as our database. With time we realized it's not really working for archival purposes, so we started looking around. What we came to use is not perfect at all, and it's another revelation that I had that was very disappointing for me, that no database is perfect. None will serve all your purposes, and you won't be happy 100% with all of them, but partially, or you can use several solutions to meet different needs. You also need to understand that every 5 years or so you may need to reconsider. I used to think that I will find this perfect solution for us and we will live happily ever after. It never happened because it doesn't exist simply. So what we use now, can you show? This is a database based on MIMSI. I'll be talking, you can show. It still serves its purpose because we did migrate data from there to, go back to the old one, yes. And go to browse, please. So what was in MIMSI, the biggest disadvantage of MIMSI is, I'll be done, is that it doesn't have any online interface. And in this day and age, it's just unacceptable. You need to know what you have. You need to let people know what you have. This is the purpose of archives, not only to preserve materials that you have, but make them available and let people use them. So this is the interface that was created for MIMSI some 18 years ago, I believe. As far as I know, it's not really updated. It has information that was migrated there some time ago, and they're now looking at how to make this online interface that would be linked to the database. But because it doesn't really work for us, we decided to look elsewhere. So another solution that we are using now is called Atom. It's a specifically archival database. It was created by archivists for archivists, first commissioned by the International Council on Archives a long time ago, but then the funding ended and the Canadian Archival Consultant Group took over and they keep up the development of this product. It's good for archives because it's built for archives. It's used by all the provincial archival councils in Canada, with the exception of Quebec, of course. They have their own database. And it's also used by very many universities in Canada. I see every now and then Dalhousie now joined and launched a new database based on it, and some other institution. I know Manitoba Provincial Network uses Atom. I don't know if you, James, use it at the university. Yes? It has many things that I don't like, but it works for many of our purposes. And I just wanted, Katya, can you show the example? Can you type? So there is a search bar on top of this database and type Klemash. So Robert Klemash is the prominent Ukrainian Canadian folklorist. He lives in Winnipeg now. For the longest time, he lived in Ottawa and worked at the Museum of Civilization, Museum of Man, Museum of Civilization, and currently Museum of History. And he did his PhD research on the prairies mostly. He interviewed very many people in the 60s, early 60s. It's 63, 64 as I remember. And we have his materials because they were, as far as I know, Maryna, Bogdan Medvedsky, and Robert Klemash, they all lived in Ottawa, so they hang out regularly together, and they shared materials. So if they came across something that looks, oh, this is folkloric, they would send it to Dr. Medvedsky. So Dr. Klemash also shared his material. And can you try playing the file? So these are audio files. They were digitized. And just click on the,
Hello, this is July 26, 965, Vegreville, Alberta, with Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. Moishuk, and Mrs. Kuz.
So the original recording was done on reel-to-reel, but then it was digitized and now can be accessed. Another solution that we use is also Mecca. Oh, sorry. Yay! Thank you. I'll go to the next. So what we try to do with Atom is put all the top-level descriptions there. We try to, in order to understand what we have to describe each collection on a very top level, and then the second will be to go deeper and describe deeper. But sometimes we get grants, or we get interested researchers, and then that defines our priorities, of course. So one of these is Sluzar music collection, and Miron Momrek, I think, mentioned Reverend Volodymyr Sluzar, the priest who started the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, St. Sophia Parish in Montreal, and was a priest there for over 30 years. He was also a choir conductor, and his music library, his handwritten music scores were donated to us by his now late son, Dr. Roman Sluzar. So there was specific interest in this project, and we got a grant to do it. So we decided to describe it on a very, very detailed level. We used Omeka, the same software that our colleagues are using, And we have, can you find, just click on any of the prettier items just to show. So, pardon me? Oh yeah, sorry. This is the last example actually, so. all of previous presenters went over time. I have tried to go over time. You didn't stop them. So we had funding, and we were lucky actually to have Lesya Savichuk's daughter work with us, Daria Staroshchuk. She's also very interested in music, and she was a student at the time. So metadata for this collection is very detailed. So aside from standard Dublin core, title, author, creator, year, and things like that, it has key and genre and composer and lyricist and whatever you want. So you can search material by all these very, very detailed items. And there's also a music score in the PDF down there. So this is another example. And just to summarize and to conclude, give me
It's just the organizers told me to keep everybody on.
Let me know who they are, I'll talk to them. So just a few items to summarize. Continuative personnel is one thing that I already mentioned, and I still believe it's very, very important. Whether they're volunteers, as we saw in Chrystyna's example, it really works. I'm really amazed how wonderfully it works. But having the same person looking after, having some institutional memory, knowing what's been happening is really, really helpful. I've been lucky to have Katya as an assistant for over 4 years now. It was first as a student, but it's such a luxury. Instead of having just students who come and go, having the same person who knows actually and understands you from half a word. This is great. Also, Eric Fincham, sitting right here. He's also been with us for 3 years, I think, by now. He finished library studies degree here at the U of A, so he knows about standards. We can talk the same language. It's really great to have the same people with me. Then professional standards, another thing that I would like again to highlight. It's important to use them, even if they're not perfect for you. In long term, it will pay off. It's very important. Professional development again, help your staff. Even if you are not the archivist, but you're on the board, help them fund that professional development, attend workshops, learn more. These things are changing all the time, and new solutions are appearing every time. It's a wonderful world and a wonderful time to be an archivist. And also the networking. I do hope that one of the results of this conference will be, I hope, will be an established network, that we will stay connected, we'll be able and not afraid to ask questions each other, help each other with the resources we have. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We have just run out of time, but I think whoever organized this conference didn't understand that these topics are so compelling and so interesting that we needed more time. So I hope that you have some time and take some time to talk to everybody individually. There's time at lunchtime and at the coffee break. So now just to conclude this session, are there any questions?
No, they want food.
By the end of this convention or onto our email, will we eventually get the name of the presenters with their email address, please? I thought that was maybe possibly a goal, and for me, I would find that most beneficial. Thank you.
I will need your permission, presenters' permission, to share your email addresses, but if you don't mind, of course, we will share them with everyone.
Thank you. I was hoping that you would extend it to everybody who's here, because I think that there are a lot of connections that are very...
I was just saying, I hope everybody would just give permission to make a list of the people who are attending and participants as well. I just find that this is very helpful in the future. And the second thing I'm wondering is, did you record the presentations? I'm hoping you did.
Rostislav Soroka over there.
Wonderful.
Recording, and we hope to be able to post them. Oleksandr showed you the 40th anniversary Fuse conference website. We are hoping to do a similar thing. So we will have the description. We won't transcribe that, it takes too much time and effort, but we will have a video presentation plus brief information about the project and presenter. Wonderful.
Compliments to all.
Any other questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, I invite everybody to partake in the lunch that's being served outside.
And I just have something for you, Irene, as a chair. It's very well deserved, so here you go. There you go.